Alright, welcome back to another one of my videos. In this video, I wanted to talk about the idea that nothing can be known. Nothing. And I get a mixed sense of reactions when I talk about this, or just when I've heard other people hear this idea. There's a couple different reactions that can come from it. And one of the first ones can just be very sense of obviousness about it, that of course nothing can be known. Some people just hear that and go instantly, well, yeah, I already knew that, even though you can't know that either. But in a sense, they already knew that nothing can be known. And kind of on the opposite spectrum of reactions, people can get pretty irritated and pretty pissed off from just hearing this idea and trying to accept this idea. And I would say that the people that have a harder time with it are probably the people that build their self-image around being a knower or being someone full of knowledge. Could possibly be someone who spent a long time going to college and learning, and so this idea almost can feel like it's taking something away from them, because it's very easy to argue with this point. If we stick on a logical level, you can definitely argue with this to as much as you want, because there's lots of things that I can say I know. And I think maybe as I talk about this, I'll progressively work our way down to more difficult ideas to disprove or to see that we actually don't know. So, maybe let's start with a more simple idea. I know there's going to be a tomorrow. Now, if we look to our brain, we can, come to a very, very high probability, because we've seen this happen over and over and over and over, where we go to sleep and we wake up and the new day has come. So it's extremely, extremely likely to say that there's going to be a tomorrow, almost to the point where we could say, I know there's going to be a tomorrow. But the word know doesn't leave any wiggle room. In order for something to be known, it has to be completely undeniable. So, this is a fairly simple one. I feel like most people could kind of figure this out on their own. Do we really know that there's going to be a tomorrow? There's a million different things that could happen. This delicate planet that we're on could end at any moment. The sun could blow up. Or even if you died, then there wouldn't be a tomorrow for you. So we can come to the conclusion that that can't be known pretty easily. And let's go to something a little more complicated. Let's say I know that the sky is blue. So that's something we could look up at the sky and see it right now. It doesn't depend on the future. It's right now we can see that the sky is blue. But the thing about that is, what if you were talking to someone that didn't speak your same language? Then would that concept of the sky is blue, which seems so extremely undeniable, would that concept mean anything to them? Because that is just the concept. The sky isn't actually this thing, this word, this sound called blue. And which shade of blue is it? Is it turquoise? Is it, it's, if we were to take a color graph of all the different shades of blue, it's somewhere infinitely on there, and it's probably not the same amount of blue everywhere. It's different. It's different color blue depending on the time of day or night. So the thing about really anything, because we're getting to, I kind of skipped from a pretty easy example down to almost the bottom of examples, but if we're talking about infinite, which technically everything is, the sky is infinite. I don't mean infinite in size, but like you can't split the sky into a bunch of little pieces. There's an infinite, you could infinitely zoom in on one piece of the sky and it would just infinitely keep going and going, and there's no, you can't split the sky off into these little sections. It's so I think I know, got myself there. I don't know. But to me it's very easy to see, and obviously we can't understand the concept of infinite, because to understand something, that means you have to put it in a box and kind of section it off from everything else. But infinite is not understandable, not explainable. But everything is infinite. Every single thing in this experience is infinite. So, and kind of the same thing applies for, I had someone once say to me, well, I know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And on a relative level, on a level of usefulness, we can't just throw that idea in the trash. That is a useful concept to know. Anything with mathematics, that level of knowing is a useful thing. It can be used. So knowing in a useful way is not, I'm not trying to disprove the value of that. But we invented the number 2. And we invented the idea of addition and the equal sign and the number 4. So the 2 plus 2 equals 4 is dependent on us understanding the concept of math and the concept of numbers, which we actually just made up. There's not actually this math out there floating around. I mean, there is patterns that we can recognize. And even to a certain degree, you could even argue that there isn't patterns. There's seeming patterns. There's apparent patterns. So, on an ultimate level, which is the truest level, we don't know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. That can't be 100% factually undeniable, because it's still dependent on some other knowing which we made up. It's not actually just there in an undeniable sense. But itchy nose today. But if we kind of modify the definition of knowing, then I think there is something that we all do know undeniably. If we kind of step out of this conceptual idea of knowing and just kind of go with the word undeniable, what is completely undeniable in your experience? Well, experience itself is undeniable. Now you could say it's undeniable that you're watching a YouTube video right now, even though those are just a couple words. You could argue with that as an idea. The idea, I am watching a YouTube video, that is just concepts and words that we invented to describe what is undeniably happening. Because there is something undeniably happening. There is seeing occurring, hearing, feeling in your body. But those words aren't what I'm talking about. All of those words could be deconstructed and seen as not true. But the things that the words represent, and it's not even the things, it's just this. This is undeniable. I wouldn't say it's knowable, because knowing, depending on how you look at the word knowing, kind of, like I said, sections it off and puts it into a box where it's like, okay, I get this. And this can't be gotten. This can't be understood. This is impossible, but yet undeniably happening. So let's take a look at what knowing really is. What is knowing? What does it mean when we say that we know something? Let's go into our own experience right here and say and look and think of something that we know. What's something that our mind says, I know this for sure? So what is that that's happening in your mind right now? I'll go back to my original example. I know the sky is blue. So what is that experience of knowing? Well, I think we could break it down to a couple different pieces, even though I wouldn't suggest that this knowing is pieces. It's not actually in separate pieces, but in order to kind of talk about it, I feel like we need to kind of separate it into separate pieces. So when I think of I know the sky is blue, kind of an image of a blue sky pops in my head. And maybe accompanied by the words, I know that the sky is blue. And then there's a feeling aspect to it, like a sort of like truth rather than false. If you think of something that you know to be false, like I know I'm 7 feet tall, there's the image of being 7 feet tall, and there's the words that go along with that, but there's a different feeling. There's a feeling of falseness rather than a feeling of accuracy and truth. And there's nothing wrong with all that. That's very useful. That's all very a useful trait of the human brain. And probably even some other animals kind of have some sort of ability to know, even though they don't have words attached to it. They still have some ability to know, and otherwise it couldn't survive. And so that's a very useful thing. So let's look at that as a direct experience thing. Do I know what knowing is? Do I know how that image is popping in my mind, or what that really even is? It's a complete mystery. Knowing is itself a complete mystery, as is every other experience. It's a complete mystery. When you really get down to the bottom of anything, all there is mystery. Like our vision happening right now, we've spent so many years studying the eye, and we kind of have an idea of how the eye might work, but we have no idea how the eye turns into this conscious experience of seeing. That is complete mystery. We have nothing that links the things that we know to the direct experience of it. There's no bridge that gaps. Oh, this is how ears turn into the experience of hearing. We understand that something vibrates in there and it sends a signal to the brain and blah blah blah, but if you add all that up, it doesn't equal this experience that's happening right now, hearing my voice actually entering into your conscious experience. We have no idea how that happens. And if you think about it, that is the base level of everything. Everything is experience. There's nothing that exists anywhere besides the experience of it. So we don't even know the very first thing. Everything that we built on top of that just crumbles to pieces because the ground layer is complete mystery. So you can't build 100% accurate knowing on top of a first step of mystery. Can't be done. So now why would I bring this topic up? Because knowing is infinitely going. You never will actually arrive somewhere through knowing, because every step up the ladder of knowing and knowledge creates 1,000 new steps in every direction. So like if I know that the sky is blue, then that means now I created 100 more questions around how and why the sky is actually blue. And let's say I now know that it's from the particles in the air and the sunlight reflecting off them and somehow creating a blue sky. Now a million questions come up around that. How does air do that? What properties of air cause light to do that? Why does the light do that in the first place? Where does the light come from? Every single step along this process of knowing creates a million different directions. And in a way, you could say that's a very beautiful thing. It's just that there's no... And there's a lot of scientists right now trying to kind of come up with this theory of everything. We've gotten so much on the macro and so much on the micro, as far as figuring out atoms and quarks and subatomic particles and all those, the tinier and tinier and tinier things. The science actually seems to not correlate with, if we look at planets and the largest things in the universe. There's kind of a disconnect of where we can't get those two things to meet. And so scientists are trying really hard to come up with this theory that covers everything and says this is how everything works. But I would suggest that can't actually be done for a lot of different reasons, because like I said, it's infinite. So if they figure out that, then that'll just lead to more questions. And also, when we broke apart knowing into separate pieces earlier, how could you fit everything into those small pieces? Like, how could you fit everything into an image in your brain and a feeling and a story that goes along with it? Like, let's say you had 1 billion words where you could write how everything works. Those 1 billion words is only a tiny little section of everything. You can't fit everything into even 1 billion trillion words, because no matter how many words you write, it's going to still just be a piece of everything. So there can kind of be a relaxation of this frustration for not knowing and a feeling that we need to know, because it's completely impossible. So that's one reason, because I kind of grew up with some of that, just constant wondering of how everything works, and just like a real need to understand how everything works. And so there can kind of be a relaxation of that need to know, because it's impossible. Not that we should stop trying to figure things out. I think that's it. I can't bring the importance of that down at all. It's just the need for that. I feel like the need to know everything can come into question. The sort of desperation, any sort of desperation there can just evaporate. So I think there is a lot of peace and relaxation in not knowing. So when we think of not knowing something, it can almost create a sense of fear and confusion and worry, because that means we have no idea what's going to happen. But in that same sense, we have no idea that anything bad is going to happen either. I think kind of stepping out of the conceptual sense of knowing can bring us more to this undeniable presence, this undeniable experience, which is known. You could almost say it's known, just not by the brain, but it's completely undeniable that there is this happening right now. And I think there is peace in that, and there's also wisdom in that, in sort of the presence of of being here rather than being here in things that can technically all be proven wrong. Anything in here can be proven to not be undeniably true. But this can't be proven, can't even be argued against. There's not even any even word to be said that there isn't this. Is just because a word would be this. So any saying anything or anything even happening proves that there is this. And some people kind of really cling on to knowing because it kind of gives them a sense of purpose in the universe and a sense of comfort and safety. And what I'm mostly talking about in this aspect would be kind of a religious knowing. The knowing that I am going to continue after death. And the knowing that everything I'm doing here is adding up to something. And really, if we're completely honest with ourselves, we don't know that either. We want to know that. We think that's how it should be. We think there should be something after this life, because that would make everything make much more sense and give us a sense of purpose and kind of ease the fear of death. So we think there should be life after this, and we think that we should be rewarded for the good and punished for the bad, or however, reincarnated into a worse life, or whichever view you have. We think that's how it should be. But we have no idea. And nobody does. Nobody does. I remember reading this book one time called Proof of Heaven. And this was back when I was still kind of like, I really wanted there to be something after this life, because like most people, they want that sense of comfort of just knowing that there isn't going to be this blankness, which is just, I want to say it's a stupid idea because I've heard it from so many people, but it's if there is nothing after this, then there's not going to be a blankness either, because that's still something. So there's not this worry of just sitting there for an eternity of like never being able to do anything and a complete blackness of nothing. Like we can't imagine us not being here. We can't imagine that. So what the best we imagine is a blankness. But that's kind of also in this realm of not knowing. But I read this book called The Proof of Heaven, and there was this neurosurgeon who got as close to you can possibly get to dying. Like the way he explained it, like the amount of luck, I guess you'd say, that he had to arrive at this specific point where everything is shut off, but somehow there's still a trace of his consciousness left, to where he does actually get brought back. I think is after a couple of days, or maybe it was a month or something, of being in a coma, and he has a near-death experience. Which, when I read this book originally, I was just eating it up. I was like, oh, this is great. This is kind of like, he's talking about proof of there being an afterlife, and he was saying like kind of how great it was and how different it was from here. Like he said, like the way that communication happened wasn't through words or anything. It was just kind of like a known. It was just knowing. Like there was just kind of a knowing that could be transferred between. He said there was these other beings happening in there, and I just totally ate that up and loved it, because it just made me kind of relax that feeling of like, oh, okay, there's, this isn't just gonna end at some point. But as I've listened to more and more speakers about this, that doesn't actually even prove anything either. because if something was still happening, then they weren't dead yet. Death is the end of this thing called you. And so if you're having a near death experience, then you haven't gone to death yet. And the thing about the mind is it's so impossible to understand, and if all of these parts of your brain are shut off, and there's only this tiny trace of consciousness left, that could be experiencing all sorts of different things as your brain is fighting to come back online. He said he saw some people that had died, like just their face. Wasn't like he fully saw them and was talking to them. He kind of just saw like flashes of them. And I think for me it's pretty easy to kind of explain that as just the brain just kind of firing on in different points, and just kind of revisiting these things. And if you think about dreaming can go anywhere. You can dream about anything, all sorts of crazy dreams, some that don't even make sense at all, that you wake up and you can't even understand how that was just happening because it doesn't relate to this human experience anymore. So I would suggest that even this knowledge from people who have had near-death experiences, I would suggest that even definitely comes into question. But I wouldn't suggest that there is nothing after life either. And here's the thing, is this whole concept of before and after doesn't have any real substance to it in reality. Time is something that we experience as humans and as creatures in this reality. And even if we break it apart into pieces, we can kind of see that there isn't actually a before and after for anything. There's memories that kind of captured what was happening and now kind of are actually built into our brain right now that suggest that there was a past, but we never actually experienced the past or the future. All there is this right now, which you could say from a certain perspective, this isn't moving or this isn't actually going anywhere, although the things within this are moving. And there is kind of the brain kind of saying, and even to understand my words, you're hearing sound after sound after sound, and it's taking those and putting it into meaning. So this whole thing with time, we can't say that there is after we die, because time is something that is just basically imagined from the way that our brain works. So this whole concept of there being something after we die, I think when we die, time just kind of collapses back into not a before and not a after and not even a now. So if we look at it that way, it kind of even more disintegrates any sort of idea that we can have of there being an afterlife. It's just completely unknown whatsoever. But I feel, and maybe this is just kind of a culmination of all the ideas, and I can't go over every single thing that I've ever learned in my whole life, but I feel that there is peace in that, not knowing. Somehow. It's not the kind of peace that you get that knowing that everything's going to be okay, because that's not known either. It's basically, I guess if I had to put it into words, it would be a trust in the beauty of this impossible thing that's happening. There's kind of, in not knowing, there's almost like a trust that can start to come up, because the more you don't know, or the less you know, kind of the more astonishing all of this is. And you kind of get a taste for how impossible everything is, the less that you know about it. And that impossibility is in harmony with beauty. It's like the more impossible it is, the more beauty we naturally see in it. So if it's that impossible, the most impossible thing, and it's still happening, then it reaches such a level of beauty that can't even be described, because of just how impossible this is, how it cannot be understood in any way, shape, or form. So I think that it's definitely worthwhile to learn things and to know things, but I think it's important to just kind of carry this sense of mystery with us as we do that. In this whole video, I haven't had any clue what I'm gonna say. And right now, I have no clue what I'm gonna say next, or if this is gonna be the end of the video. There's just this mystery that takes place seemingly inside of the brain, even though it could be argued that there's no inside or outside. And it's completely dependent upon the mystery for me to come up with something else to say that has anything to do with what we're talking about. But even with nothing to say, this is still equally beautiful, equally as impossible, and equally undeniably happening. And that never goes away, and that never stops. So that beauty that I was talking about, that comes from being impossible, never isn't there. It's always there. It's just, in a sense, you could say it's covered up by knowing. The impossibility of what's happening, every footstep, every breath, every sensation that is experienced, the beauty of it is, you could say, from a conceptual standpoint, it's covered up by the fact that we think we know it. We think we know someone. We think we know ourselves. But yet we are built out of this impossible beauty. And so is every person that we run into. So I would say that it's worthwhile to investigate, what do we really know? What do I really know? Is it possible to even know something? What is knowing even? What is knowing made out of? Knowing is made out of impossibility. Knowing is made out of the unknown. So you could say all there really is not knowing. Our entire life, that's all there's ever been, is not knowing what's going on. There's a sense of knowing, and that serves its purpose. But don't let the imaginary sense of knowing, this tool, basically, in the words of Alan Watts, it's a good servant, but a bad master. And I would suggest that in a way, we have become the servant, or it has become our master. Knowing has become our master, not our servant. Okay. I think that's a good place to end, about at 35 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you did. Hope to see you next time.